two very elderly gentlemen went walking one Sunday afternoon in the town cemetery, and as they were walking along, they were admiring the different monuments and headstones and reading the names on them. And you know, we go and we see when somebody died, when they were born, and how long they lived, and looking at the mausoleums. And as they walked along, Zephaniah said to Ephraim, "Ephraim, how old are you?" And Eve said, "Well, I'm 89. I'm 88 years old. I'm going on 89. And he said, "Well," Zeph said, "how old are you?" And there was a moment of silence, you know. He said, "Well," says, "I'm 96. Nothing was said for a few more minutes and a few seconds. Eve said, "Well, you know," said, "it's hardly worth for you to go home, isn't it?"
You got 14 more years to get.
On Tuesday, this coming week, as you know, we will celebrate the 241st birthday of America. The first settlement, the first English settlement ever in America was in Jamestown, 1607. So the English have been here a little over 400 years. But as a nation, we're only about 241 years of age. And it is the only nation that is formed and based on Judeo-Christian principles. It is said that George Washington said that it would be impossible to govern without the Bible. It is said that John Adams remarked that it would be impossible to govern without God and the Ten Commandments. And before they arrived on the shores of North America, the Pilgrims gathered below the deck of the Mayflower, and they signed something called the Mayflower Pact, and they expressed their intent to advance the enlargement of the Christian religion to the glory of God Almighty. In 1632, when Maryland was chartered as a colony, they wrote, "We are motivated with the pious zeal for extending the Christian religion." The last sentence of the Declaration of Independence says this: "For the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance upon the protection of the divine providence, we mutually pledge each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." Now, the question has always been raised and discussed on different sides of the aisle, if you will, left and right. Is America a Christian nation? Now, the hardline fundamentalist Christian is going to say, yes, it is. The hardline agnostic and skeptic is going to say, no, it is not. And whether we believe that America is a Christian nation or not, there is certainly one thing that is very clear: that the founding fathers based this government and based this nation upon a biblical worldview, which simply means that they believed that whatever the Bible had to say, it had something to say about nation building. Now, there are a number of ingredients that go into the making of this country, but that one single ingredient above all the others that we hear mostly is this one word: freedom. The Pilgrims who landed at Massachusetts in November of 1620 came to the shores of North America looking for religious freedom. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution, we call them the Bill of Rights, we legislated to ensure ourselves certain basic freedoms. And of course, just as a historical aside, the Bill of Rights are based upon several other documents. One of those documents is the Virginia Declaration of Rights. The other is the English Bill of Rights of 1689, and even go back farther, it is based upon the Magna Carta of 1215. Now, we call America the home of the brave and the land of the free. But many of us are beginning to wonder if we're not on the threshold of losing at least some of our freedoms. America is not a utopia. It's not a perfect place. It never has been. We have the skeptics now who choose to focus upon that in our educational system rather than on the whole entire picture, the overwhelming picture on the other side. We choose to denigrate our forefathers and our founding fathers rather than to look at what they really achieved in carving out of a nation, out of this new country, this new planet, this new continent that they had come to. And many want to come to America. Millions want to come to America. It is said that we have something like 11 million people who are aliens in this country, illegal aliens. If you put that against the population of Canada, that's 26% of the population of Canada. Not a great percentage of our country. We're 300 million people. But that's a lot of people. And they come for a lot of reasons. They come looking for a better life. They come looking to escape oppression. They come because they want to live free. The movie Braveheart, you'll remember, back in the last century that we lived in. Some of us, have lived in 2 centuries now. Never thought I'd see 2 centuries. But anyway, the movie Braveheart, as you'll recall, was an epic tale of the 13th century Scottish freedom fighter, William Wallace, who led Scotland in a fight of independence against England, whose king at the time was Edward I. He had the nickname of Longshanks. At the end of the movie, the British have captured William Wallace. He is spread eagle on an execution table. And the executioner says, if you will renounce your fight against the crown, against the King of England, against Edward I, if you will embrace England as your country, I will assure you that you will die a fast and quick death. And as the movie has it, the character who plays William Wallace screams out from deep within the core of his being with the last breath he can and all the rest that he has, freedom! And then he is executed. In actual history, William Wallace was taken to England by the British. He was hanged and drawn and quartered, and he was buried in an unmarked grave. You see, sometimes we try to hide our past, but it just can't be done always, can it? William Wallace was a blight upon the King of England. Now, if you care to follow in the scripture text that I'm going to preach from or talk from this morning for a few minutes, I invite you to turn to the 23rd chapter of the Gospel of Luke at verse 32. And there was also 2 other malefactors led with him to be put to death. And when they were come to the place which is called Calvary, where they crucified him, and the malefactors, one on the right hand and the other on the left. Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they parted his raiment and cast lots. And the people stood beholding. And the rulers also with them derided him, saying, He saved others, let him save himself, if he be the Christ, the chosen of God. And the soldiers also mocked him, coming to him and offering him vinegar, and saying, If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself. And a superscription was written over him in letters of Greek and Latin and Hebrew. This is the King of the Jews. And of the malefactors which were hanging, and one railed on him, saying, If you are the Christ, save yourself and save us. But the other answering rebuked him, saying, Do you not fear God, seeing you are in the same condemnation? And we indeed rightly so, for we receive the just reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong. And he said unto Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus said unto him, Verily I say unto you, today you shall be with me in paradise. And it was about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour. And the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. And when Jesus had cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. And having said this, he gave up the ghost. And here is the reading of Holy Scripture. Would you bow with me, please? This morning, God, it is my privilege to stand in your presence once again and attempt to be a spokesman for your kingdom. I would pray, oh God, this morning that you would fill me up and empty me again, but love me. I would ask you this morning, oh God, to take my words and make them thine. Rescue me from me. In this July the 4th season, we will pay tribute to our founding fathers. And we will remember the sacrifices for the independence that we have and the freedoms that we enjoy. But I would suggest to you this morning that we would need to come and also remember what God has done for us through Jesus Christ, his only begotten Son. He has given us the greatest Independence Day of all. He has given us ultimate independence.
Amen.
There was a battle going on between the spiritual forces of evil and the spiritual forces of good. God and the heavenly host on one side, Satan and the forces of evil on the other. And the battle was for the souls of humanity. Paul gives us a good description of that battle in the 6th chapter of Ephesians. And Paul says it goes on constantly, and we know that it does. I've been fighting a battle, my own battle, I think, with that force of evil over the past 24 hours, with great questions. As I have watched men preach on television, as I was watching this morning, I got up early. I got up earlier this morning than I've ever gotten up on a Sunday morning, and I can't remember how long. I was awake at 5 o'clock. I finally decided I might get up about 6:45. Even cooked myself breakfast, which I shouldn't have done. But at any rate, I was watching some preachers I wanted to watch, some guys I never get to see very often. And I listened to those guys. And that was God on one side and Satan on the other. And I won't go into any detail about that. Paul has given us a description of this battle, and he's also given us a method on how to prepare for it. You've got to have that armor that God provides, and only God can provide it. You can't get it anywhere else. And it's a battle that you and I cannot win in and of ourselves. We will just lose it if we try. In the 23rd chapter of the Gospel of Luke, Luke tells us where our Independence Day came from and how it happened. It happened outside the gates of Jerusalem a little over 2,000 years ago in a place called Calvary. Golgotha, the place of the skull. And when they had come to the place called Calvary, there they crucified him. Jesus could not have been crucified anywhere else than where he was. He could not have been assassinated on some little dirty, dusty road as he traveled down through Palestine by some sniper who disliked him, who maybe had been sent by the hierarchy of the Jewish religion of the time, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. Jesus had to die in Jerusalem. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to you. prophecy had to be fulfilled. He was hung between two malefactors, two criminals. The Greek word is kakouos. In any language, it's bad. Now, and again, it's all about prophecy. They made his grave with the wicked. True independence didn't start at Calvary. Began in that little insignificant place called Bethlehem. And I like the way Halford Lukacs has put it. Began on that night that God walked down the altar stairs of heaven with a baby in his arms and laid him in a feed trough. Because he was to be humanity's ultimate means of salvation. Your salvation and my salvation doesn't have to be on a particular day. It doesn't have to be on a particular month. It doesn't have to be in a particular season. It doesn't have to be at a particular hour. I remember an uncle of mine was a revival going on in a local church, and we were attending, and the Spirit of God was dealing with him. He just would not give in. He was out plowing corn with a 3-foot plow, and the Holy Spirit got a hold of him. There was a battle going on between him, the forces of evil, and the forces of righteousness in his life, and God won. He couldn't wait to get to church and tell about it. Amen. Remember that old song? I can tell you now the time, I can take you to the place where the Lord saved me by his amazing grace. And I bet you, if I gave you time, that I could hear some wonderful testimonies. The Independence Day God gave to humanity culminated on Calvary. And it has a name. It's called the Day of Salvation. The salvation of all humanity. It happened outside of the gates of Jerusalem. It happened at Calvary. It happened 2,000 years ago. And it is a day that has had an impact upon the history of the whole entire world. It was a day of humiliation. It was a day of humiliation. From August 1992 to March of 1994, America was involved in a little small African village, African nation called Somalia. It started out as a humanitarian relief effort. The troops who participated in this effort were sent there, and they were greeted by the Somalis, who were so happy to be saved from starvation. Then, not long after that, and one day in October of 1993, we woke up to the news that dozens of our military personnel had been killed in fierce fighting in the streets of the capital city of Mogadishu. I never will forget seeing in a photo magazine, or I don't know where it was Look, I don't know what Saturday, I don't know which one it was, I just don't remember. But I never will remember seeing this picture of an 18-year-old young man who had been killed, who was stripped almost naked. His shoes, everything was gone. And some youths in that village had a rope tied around his ankle, dragging him down the dusty streets of the city, and people standing on the sidelines laughing and cheering. I remember reading in the same magazine of two young men who had been killed, who had been stripped naked, and who had been hung on a bridge in humiliation. It was humiliating for me to read of these atrocities against these young men who had been ordered there on a humanitarian mission that turned bad. The crown prince of heaven was treated in an intensely humiliating manner. There's a picture outside of our sanctuary as you come into the sanctuary. I don't know how many of you ever noticed it. Beautiful picture. It's two images of Christ, two different images of Christ in the same picture. One of them is in the forefront, and there's Christ as we often picture him. Pure, nothing wrong with him, in a white robe. Then behind him is another picture of Christ with blood streaming down his face, with a crown of thorns on his head. And I don't know how many of us remember that picture even hangs there. I believe that the front picture is what Jesus looked like before he went into the Praetorium, the Roman garrison that was in Jerusalem. And I believe the second image is what Jesus looked like when he came out of that Praetorium. After he had been beaten, after he had been spat on, after he had been humiliated and mocked, after his divinity, after his royalty had been doubted. It was the practice of the Roman government, as you know, and as you've studied in Sunday school, to hang a notice around the neck of condemned individuals who were going to be crucified, stating what their crime was. It was a further act of humiliation, if you will. And as I believe, as Jesus Christ staggered down that little narrow street that we call the Via Dolorosa, that he had hanging around his neck that sign that said, "This is Jesus from Nazareth. He is accused of sedition." And then they got to Calvary. They laid him down on that cross and they drove the spikes through his wrist. They strung him up and they crossed his feet and they drove spikes through his ankles. And then they nailed another cross, another caption up over his head, a superscription, if you will. Said, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Didn't humiliate Jesus, but it certainly humiliated the Jews. Because the Bible has said, their doctrine has said, their law has said, that anyone who hangs on a tree is condemned of God. And the Romans wanted to make sure that everyone who knew this criminal or who looked upon this criminal, they wanted the people to know who he really was, and they wrote it in the three common languages of the day: Greek, Roman, and Latin, or Hebrew. He was crucified in a strategic spot where people would see him as they come and went. And there were his detractors. I think Lucas says, that says that after Jesus was tempted in the wilderness 40 days, Satan left him for a little while. Satan showed up again at Calvary. If you're the Christ, come down, and we're believing you. One of the malefactors. If you're the Christ, save yourself and save us. If he wasn't interested in a long-term salvation, he was interested in a temporal salvation. He wanted the nails pulled out of his wrists and out of his feet. He wanted the pain to cease and to stop. And then there was the other one who understood his condition, who knew he hung there rightly and justly. He didn't call for relief from his pain, his physical pain. He called for relief from eternal damnation. Remember me when you come into your paradise. And Jesus promised him that he would. On that day, Luke tells us that nature responded. May the 20th, 1979 was a Sunday. On that day, my father passed away. That's 38 years ago. And what stands out in my memory so vividly of that time, and maybe only my memory, And I am speaking to you literally here, not euphemistically. Not figuratively. It was the spring of the year. The time the sun should have been shining. Birds should have been singing. In my youth, at that time of the year, I was looking forward to getting rid of my shoes and going barefooted for the rest of the entire summer. But the birds were not singing, it seemed to me. The sun was not shining all that much. It wasn't raining either. It wasn't all that warm entirely. It just seemed to me that there was gloom everywhere. Certainly there was. But it just seemed to me that it was kind of like an unnatural gloom. And maybe I was the only one that really noticed it. I don't know. Never talked to anybody about it. Do I place some otherworld significance upon that day? Do I believe that nature was mourning with my family? I don't go there. But Luke tells us that when Jesus died on Calvary, that nature responded. On the Independence Day of the world, nature spoke. It was dark at the 6th hour, that's 12 noon. And it was dark for the next 3 hours. Now, if you're a skeptic and you want a scientific explanation, you'll say, well, it was an eclipse. It was an eclipse. I don't know if there was an eclipse at that period of time or not. I don't know if nature had already scheduled a time, this particular time, that the earth would be dark. And it was dark for 3 hours. Now I tried to find out how long an eclipse would last. And so I get on my little machine that I have sitting in the corner. All of us got one. Most of us have one of these little technological things we call a computer that controls our life. And I began to try to find out how long an eclipse lasts. And I found 2 answers. 1 hour and 40 minutes to 2 hours. This darkness lasted for 3 hours. Maybe an eclipse can last 3 hours. I don't know. I choose to believe that God was speaking from heaven and trying to get the world's attention. And He turned the earth dark because there was no joy in heaven. I'll ask God about that when I see Him. Matthew remembers that the tombs opened up. The saints came up out of the grave. They went on a shopping trip down in Jerusalem. Many people saw them. We've got all these movies now about zombie nations. I wonder if somebody read Matthew. In parable form, I believe on that day that the bulwarks of heaven were just loaded with people, entities, divine entities. There stood God the Father watching what was going on down on Calvary. On one side of Him stood Michael. Michael would be in charge of the 12 legions of God's angels. I heard a preacher talking about a legion this morning. Said a legion consisted of about 6,500 soldiers. How many soldiers that is? 12 of them. That'd be 70, some almost 80,000. They were standing there. They're ready. They're just waiting for a word. On the other side is the messenger angel, Gabriel. God doesn't speak. And everybody's wondering, is God going to do anything? Is He going to say anything? Is He going to respond? And you know what? God couldn't. God couldn't for a while. Because if God had done something, you and I would have lost our Independence Day. But then I believe God did spoke. And he spoke to Gabriel. And he said to Gabriel, tell death to go get him. And in the beautiful framework of Weldon Johnson, James Weldon Johnson, death climbed upon his pale horse. And he rode down through the moons and the stars and the suns. And he came down through the Milky Way. And only Jesus could see him coming. And he rode down to Calvary. And he took Jesus in his bosom. And Jesus spoke 6 words up to that point. And he spoke one more word. One more word. Barely perhaps could get it out. And only those who stood real close to the cross might have heard it. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And with these few words, our eternal freedom was secured. We gained our independence. You and I are grateful to the men and women for the last 40 years or so that have kept us free. We're grateful for those who had the foresight to build a nation. Our men and women who served us in the military, who have indeed gave us of their fortunes and even their lives and made us a nation of freedom. The selfless giving of these people have made this land that we call the home of the brave, the land of the free. And I resent those who denigrate America. I understand her scars. I understand her blemishes. I don't like them. But I resent those who burn our flag. I resent those because they just have the right to do it. Do they ever stop to think about all of those who died that gave them that right? I resent those who spit on our country, even our own citizens. Because I'm proud of my country. I don't like some of the things it's done. I don't agree with some of the things it's done. But I love my country. I don't know of any other place in the world that I want to live other than in America. And I'm sure that most of you feel the same way. All of you feel the same way. The selfless giving of Jesus Christ has secured our eternal freedom, our ultimate freedom, from the grasp of satanic evil, which would condemn us to eternal damnation, to hell. But Jesus has assured us that we are free. Therefore, if the Son has made us free, we are free indeed. That was John's message to his church. That's the message that rings across the centuries to you and me. In this Independence Day, when we celebrate the independence of our country, I thank God for my ultimate independence. We're going to stand and sing our hymn of invitation, and maybe you need to come and pray. Maybe there's something you need to do for God today. I don't know. If God's speaking to you and you need to act, I would encourage you to do that. As we stand and sing, hymn number 291, Beneath the Cross of Jesus.